Welcome to LifeWorks Today. This podcast is provided so that together we can create a world in which all people love their lives. Our current human systems aren't working. The way of superior versus inferior, or management versus employee, or adult versus child. We need a powerful, positive, and sustainable transformation. This podcast is for you who seek to be happy, fulfilled, and peaceful so that your abundant life works today.
So welcome back to the show, LifeWorks Today. This is episode 3, so I'm very excited to be here. I encourage you to listen to episodes 1 and 2 if you haven't yet done that. The first episode was called Spitting in the Soup. And what I was really talking about in that episode were the 4 control models, using autocratic behaviors, incentives and rewards, judgment, and enabling or pampering and spoiling, all in an attempt to kind of manipulate behavior. And since I did that one, I went back and I looked up the term spitting in the soup because I wanted to give you the exact words of renowned therapist Alfred Adler, who is the psychologist that we follow. Adler recognized that stirring up change can be difficult. So spitting in the soup is a memorable metaphor. It reminds us that sometimes it's necessary to spoil the fun in order to alter negative patterns and create positive behavior change. And spit in the soup so that it's ruined. So spitting in the soup takes the joy out of a negative behavior pattern that we may not have been aware was not as helpful as we thought. So I love that term, kind of gross, but it does the trick. In episode 2, I introduced what do you do instead of using a control model. So I got started in what's a responsibility-based culture model and what are the primary beliefs around how to manage people, what are the outcomes, what are the beliefs you hold about people. So if you remember, the responsibility-based model is one in which people hold a really positive belief about other people, where in the 4 control models, the belief about people were very limiting and very small. And so in the responsibility-based model, we talked about how it's really important for people to own their own tasks for managing their relationships, managing their own mood, their own engagement, their own productivity, their own plan. And when they do that, they feel a sense of fulfillment, especially when it's in service to more than just themselves. So we talked a little bit about the importance of having social interest. And I also talked about some of the tenets of the Adlerian psychology model. I realized today I wanted to kind of say a little bit more about that one of the tenets that I brought up is that as people, we're hardwired for a sense of belonging and significance. We're hardwired to feel that we matter. And when we do, we feel 4 very core needs. And those core needs are that we feel empowered, that we feel that we have a voice, that we can influence things. We feel that we are connected to one another in meaningful and joyful ways, like a sense of, hi, I'm so glad you're here. We also feel lovable, which is different than being loved. So when somebody feels lovable, they're actually feeling seen and heard. So a way that we would be with someone so that they would feel lovable would be to ask more questions about how they see the world and not bring our own agenda or our own intent to necessarily convert them or change them or fix them, but to look for the gift and the delight in who they actually are, how they think, how they feel emotionally. And so that's something that is often missing, that we don't know how to do a great job of sometimes. And then people also need to feel that they have opportunities to contribute to others. And because we don't always feel so great about ourselves, it's difficult for us to reach out and ask for help from other people and let them contribute to us because we're sometimes stuck in our own patterns of shame or, am I worthy? And it's also very vulnerable to ask things of people. And yet it's a core need to help other people make contributions to us. So those are just some of the things that are really core to that one of the Adler concepts, which is we're social. And if you think about the control models, they all work against people feeling empowered, lovable, connected, and contributing. And so I just kind of want to keep connecting those dots for you. I wanted to also, in this episode, I want to dig a little deeper into what is this responsibility-based model, what is it all about? How do you get to it? What are the components of it? What are the things that cause it to be successful? Why do we need a responsibility-based model? So I really want to dig a little bit deeper into that. And really, a responsibility-based model is as different as like a ranch house is to a two-story, or a paleo diet is to a vegan diet, or a punitive parenting model is to a leadership development parenting model. So there's a lot of things that are really important to understand about what is this responsibility-based model. So that's kind of where we're going to be focusing today. Before I introduce our guest, which I'm getting ready to do, I'm very excited to introduce her, I wanted to open with this quote. And it's a quote by Viktor Frankl, who was a survivor of the Auschwitz camps. And it kind of reminds me also of another person that was so incredible through difficulties, which was Nelson Mandela. But this quote by Viktor Frankl is really food for thought. He says, "Between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom." So he's talking about the response that comes when there's a space where we can really check in with ourselves. And that's really what the core of responsibility it is. Responsibility is the ability to respond from our deepest wisdom, our truest self, the love that we are. And we can't do that unless we pause between the stimulus and the response. So I really want you to keep that in mind as I kind of move more deeply into this new culture model. So now, without further ado, I want to introduce our guest, who is Lynn Dornfield. Lynn is a great friend of mine and a client of mine who has spent many years in education. I think it's 28 years, but I'll let her clarify that. She recently retired as a Montessori educator in both public and private schools. And now that she's retired, she's wondering how did she ever have time to work? So she's very busy still. Today, Lynn focuses on educating, empowering, and supporting people in social and racial justice areas, including the facilitating of healing ourselves and living as joyful beings. And I love that because Lynn and I are really sharing a common purpose to create a world where people love their lives.
Yes.
Because if you're loving your life, that's when you can be a loving and joyful, living as a joyful being. Lynn is also the mother of 5 children and 9 grandchildren?
9
grandchildren. And she, like me, raised her children with the Adlerian philosophy promoted by Rudolf Dreikurs, who was a follower of Alfred Adler. Mm-hmm. And she used that same philosophy when she was teaching at Montessori and then at John Burroughs. She has a strong faith in the individual person, how they can, each one of them, make a difference. With others like myself, Lynn is working to change things in the world through one heart and one mind at a time. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such a privilege to be here. And just one correction, that I have never taught at Burroughs, but my kids went there.
Okay.
And that was just really supplemental to the Montessori background that they had, which so aligns with what you were talking about for children, that sense of individual responsibility, but also a joy of learning. Mm-hmm. And we were thrilled to find out that, because we'd never thought about private school for our kids. My husband and I were both public school people and very happy with our education. But really learned, the more we found out, what do you do for children nowadays? Mm-hmm. This sense of individual responsibility is so crucial, and that we do matter and we do make an impact. Mm-hmm. And that's what gets me so excited every time I hear your talks or read I only saw online what you have been presenting that's out in the public. And it's so exciting. It's so exciting.
Every time wow. Lynn and I talk, there's so much that we're so like-minded and like-hearted. And even though you might hear us talking in this podcast about children, it's really the same dynamic that people are dealing with in the workplace, yes. are dealing with in their churches, their neighborhoods, and their exactly. families. It's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
Human systems.
And that's kind of what I'm bringing in, that even though I'm, quote, retired, the fact that what this work does impacts on so many levels. I was listening just today on NPR, Tom Herr, who used to be the head at New City School, which has this phenomenal reputation for their education that they've done with children. I've actually had 3 grandchildren that went through there, so I know directly how awesome the programs are that these children experience, where they create their own musicals. I mean, just anyway, didn't mean to sidetrack that too much, except that they were saying that public school today, they've not done studies. They've done them in military, in corporate world, in the, who am I leaving out? Education, corporations,
And military.
and military, that they now want to prove how impactful studying virtues. And in your program, I think it's called values. But they were talking about virtues, and even just taking 4 virtues and so incorporating that into the system. Education is changing. How we're raising our children is changing, which it needs to be doing.
Yes. Yes, that's why we talked about it in one of the previous episodes. There were no real good old days. People say, why can't we go back to the good old days? You know,
I love
we just
that.
got to get that out of our head.
Yes.
But one of the things that's kind of flashing through my head is you came to one of my workshops recently where we went over those 4 core needs. People needing to feel a sense of being empowered, lovable, connected, and contributing. And I just want to remind you of an exercise that I had you guys do. Maybe you could speak to it. What I did was I had all the participants of that session partner up, and I walked you through where you chose to look at the person across from you, and you chose to listen to my words and intend them for the people in front of you. And in the first case, you were actually doing it for the person that was in front of you. And it was all about words that spoke to the beauty of their empowerment, the beauty of their lovableness, the beauty of their connectiveness, the beauty of their contributions that they made. And then I had you guys switch it up so the person was Hitler.
Right. Yeah, and I can remember when I first paired with the lady, her goal is to make St. Louis the love capital of the world. It was so easy to just stand and look at her with all this loving admiration while you had all these glowing things to say about her, and it felt like we were rising to another level. But then when you said, now imagine that person is Hitler, I felt down to the depths of the earth, and I just actually then realized, wait a minute, but wanted to just cry for that person.
Yes.
How damaged they had to have been.
Yes.
Because the virtues you were describing, you probably remember what they were, did apply. How charismatic, how intelligent.
How empowered he was.
Yes.
And just that he hadn't had the support he needed to do more loving, fulfilling things with all of that power and all of that sense of connection. And it was really funny to watch some of you guys. I don't think it was you, but some of you would just as soon as it was Hitler, you dropped hands. Before that, people wanted to hold hands and everything.
Right.
So, but it was really helpful because then you guys went on to look at someone and they represented the person you most dislike.
Yes.
Maybe the person who represents a political position you can't stand, or a religious position, or some other position. And for many groups that I've done this with, that was harder than Hitler. So I don't know if you had that experience. Maybe you can talk a little bit. Was it more difficult for you to kind of come to terms with there are these gifts inside of a Hitler that I had never really considered, as opposed to the gifts in a person that you really don't care for?
Probably it was hardest, I think, looking at Hitler, because everything else after that was just a shift.
Yes.
And if we can look at someone in a world leadership capacity and try to have some kind of kinder and gentler ways of looking at them, for me, then looking at someone real in the life, and there were several individuals I could envision. I think because of having been from a teaching background and looking at people, knowing any one of us can be magnificent, powerful human beings, no matter how damaged we have been, given a support system. And I want to be that ally. I want to be that person who truly believes in the other individual, whatever that is.
And finds a way for them to feel empowered, lovable, connected, and contributing that is not sort of distorted, right? It's really interesting because I think the reason, I mentioned this in an earlier episode, is that when this approach was used in a prison, the amount of people that were reincarcerated went down to 4% from the national average of 60 to 70%. And one of the things I think were a cause of that is that if I could look at somebody in prison that maybe is in there for murdering somebody on the street corner because they wanted to be in a gang so bad, maybe the only place they ever felt empowered, lovable, connected, and contributing was in that gang. Now I can take them out of that monster box and think of them as you and I are no different than each other than you didn't think you had as many options for getting those needs met. So you were willing to override your conscience and your fear of imprisonment to get those needs met, right? And that's kind of what I want people to see, that, man, if we write them off, there's no hope for them.
There's no hope then. Yeah.
And we also do it for ourselves. Like a lot of times I'll say to people, how many of you get up in the morning and look in the mirror and say things that make you feel empowered? Or is it, oh God, I think I have another wrinkle, you know? So we have a hard time looking at ourselves and being delighted. We have a hard time connecting sometimes with aspects of ourselves that we don't feel proud of. We have a hard time seeing where we're contributing when we can see places we don't feel like we're contributing. We tend to look at what we're not doing, right?
Yes, just last fall, a friend, we'd been doing these weekly gatherings in our home, and he just shared that he went down to the basement to do his prayers or meditating and different things. But he would also look in the mirror and just say, I love you, Roxy. And I tried to envision myself going to a mirror and I tried it. And it felt so,
right.
Yeah.
Right. We're so much more comfortable looking for the things that are wrong with us instead of the thoughts that will actually make us feel empowered, lovable, connected, and contributing.
So I work on that. You have given me just a lot of different skills that sometimes I actually remember to incorporate them. That's wonderful.
Well, it sounds like it's simple when we talk about it, but in actuality, we're all fighting against these old systems, you know, and that's why I really wanted to kind of even slow that in that quote between the stimulus and response. So many times we're doing things out of what we've been taught and conditioned to do, and we're just in a reaction. We're not really thinking of that space in between stimulus and response, right?
Yes.
So one of the things, I'm so glad thank you for letting me go over those core needs, because I realized I hadn't covered those, and those are crucial to, you know, is the culture that I'm using, whether it's in my workplace or in my home, is it one in which it actively supports those 4 core needs, or does it tear those down? I remember when my kids were growing up, we did these kind of radical things, like we would teach the kids how to grocery shop, and we'd give them $200 and send them off to the store. Nowadays, we'd probably get reported to the police, but it was a safe neighborhood, and they'd been trained. And we didn't even have cell phones, so they'd have to go call us from the pay phone. But what it did for them is they came back from those experiences saying, wow, the checkout people thought we were crazy because you guys were handling hundreds of dollars, your parents trust you. And we could tell them, you know, yeah, we've been trained and we know how to do this. So we did a lot of things to remove the behaviors that would take their feeling of empowerment down, or their feeling of lovableness down, and replace those with other behaviors. And it's amazing once your mind starts to do that and you start to change that. Did you have a thought about that?
I was just thinking of the decades of change that when we raise children like that, you probably look at your grandchildren and can see what a difference for them with the choices and responsibilities, because their parents were raised with that as opposed to what you. So we really are, I guess I'd use the line, creating an ever-advancing civilization. We're not trying to raise perfect kids or perfect grandkids.
Or perfect people.
Exactly, because mistakes are part of who we are, that it's okay to make mistakes. But if you're not even allowed to attempt, if you don't even get to buy something from a store, how would you know what to do with it?
So it was really a fun time, because we could see that as we would invest in them in that way, it not only helped them, it helped us to feel better as parents and better as leaders. And I think a lot of people in companies, they get a little disgusted with their employees, but really it's because they haven't felt like they've known how to develop their people in a way that's fulfilling for them.
Yes.
So one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit more about, when I talk about the 4 core needs, you've heard me mention inferiority complex, but I mentioned it in some of the last episodes, but I didn't really explain it.
Okay.
So inferiority complex is a term that was originated with Alfred Adler. And basically what he was saying is, if you don't create certain kinds of conversations and certain kinds of conditions, people will go into this place where they don't like themselves. And my friend Mike Bitter calls that shame spirals, and going into like this downward shame that we get stuck in. And when we get stuck in it, that's when we do go in those uninterrupted places of where we're stressed out, depressed, anxious. You know, and a lot of times for me, what I'm trying to learn to do in my life is really sit when those feelings come up and let compassion be present with them. Because if you can't kind of heal through what's going on, you'll keep repeating patterns to reinforce that, which is very much what individual psychology is. We'll create conditions to keep reinforcing what we think is true. So inferiority complex was a big deal to him, and it's ironic in a way because Brene Brown is so famous right now, and she's really speaking on the same thing. She's saying we're one of the most over-medicated, over-addicted cohort of adults, and it's because we go into that sense of shame and unworthiness.
Yes.
And then we don't feel those 4 core needs. So it's just kind of a vicious cycle. And so until organizations as a whole, whether it's a church or a workplace or a school, know that we've got to protect people from going into that inferiority complex and really understand what causes that, we'll keep creating the very source of all the struggles that people have.
Right.
Did you see some of that in the way that you were with either your kids at school or your kids at home?
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the blessings that I had was learning what reevaluation counseling talks about, that we really are born powerful, loving, zestful, dynamic human beings. And it's the things that happen to us, the distress that gets put on us. And if we're not allowed to really look at that and honor it, as you said, feel the feeling, but it doesn't mean you stay there. You're just listened to and heard, and you will come up with a very elegant solution if you've been honored for it and respected. And that's one of the things probably why I fell in love with Montessori so much, because she really was all about that individual responsibility. But we can learn, we can go and do, and setting up, my job as the teacher was just set up the environment for the child to experiment, and having complete faith in that child, that they're going to choose what's needed for them, the environment's prepared for them. And carrying that through then with our children, and switching to love-based discipline, not fear-based discipline.
Absolutely. And you know, what's interesting is even Montessori and Adlerian were relatively small segments of the whole. Most kids didn't have those experiences, whether they were in their homes or in their schools. So we've got a whole set of generation of people that are still a little bit more conditioned toward the punitive, fear-based way of doing things, right?
Very much so.
And that kind of explains, I think, why we have an ongoing problem with employee engagement in companies and engagement in churches, engagements in helpful endeavors in the community. In the Gallup, I never cease to really refer back to that, because the Gallup is an organization that kind of keeps track of how many people are disengaged. And in general, it's about 71% who are in some level of disengagement. And I think you can carry that through almost anywhere you go. That's why we have an 80-20 rule, you know, where 80% of the people are doing the heavy lifting. So in the Gallup survey, they found that 55% of people are just kind of skimming by. We call them the C- people, because they come to work every day, they do their job, but don't ask me to do anything above and beyond, because I'm just here to do the bare minimum. Even though they don't really say those words, that's the way that they come across. So you don't go to them when you really are in a pinch, because they're not going to be your A-game people.
Right.
And then there's about 16% of people who typically actually cause problems. Those are called actively disengaged. We all know who they are when we see them. They're the ones that are gossiping, constantly complaining and negative and judgmental out loud, and you know, just a lot of things that actually tear down. They're also the ones that might come to work drunk or high, or living their life that way a lot, you know. And so the why is bigger than the symptom. The symptom is all that disengagement, but the why comes from those 4 core needs and that inferiority. So that's why when it's eliminated in an organization, which I've personally seen, it's so addictive, because why would anybody tolerate 70% disengagement if we can change that? So
I've been in the business world too for a short time, kind of an interim, And you're right. You have so described what I saw. You often felt like you were swimming against the mainstream if you are striving to just be honest, fair, just, kind, hardworking.
What's wrong with you?
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Don't get us too happy and hopeful here.
Right. And I would just keep reminding myself it's just like dealing with kindergartners. You know, there is another way.
It really is. I think sometimes people worry if I use examples of school or children or whatever, but it's the same exact principles because we all have those inner fears within us. We just try to be more sophisticated about how we play it out, right? Or not. Some people are not so sophisticated.
Those 4 core things.
Yes, yes.
So you really were identifying. Do you want to refresh real quick what those 4 are?
Yeah, the 4 core needs.
Helpful.
The 4 core needs, and you want to just keep thinking about this for yourself. Empowered means, do you help yourself and others to feel that they have a voice, that they have influence, that they can make a difference, that they have power, that it's okay that they use their power. For many people, the messages they got about power were, it's not safe to use your power, you're bad if you use your power, you're not a good girl or a good boy if you, even as an adult. So empowered is a big deal. There's whole communities of people that are marginalized that don't feel that they have the power.
That is so true.
And they don't have the financial power, or they don't have the voice that they deserve to have, that sort of thing. The second one I always like to think of as lovable, because lovable isn't the same as somebody loving you. If I'm helping you be lovable, I'm listening to you. I'm asking you questions about how you see the world. I'm not here to listen to those to fix you or change you, but to learn from you. So when we help anyone, even if we're the CEO and we're talking to the janitor, the goal should be, how can I learn from the janitor as much as he can learn from me, and vice versa. And connected just means that we show up to people with that caring gaze, with that joy of seeing somebody, that they feel that they're welcome into the community. I mean, almost all school shootings go back to kids that felt isolated and unwanted and disconnected. And that's what happens when we get into the shame spiral, is we go into this place of wanting to isolate. I know I'm tempted to do it, where I just want to shut down and hide from anybody that even loves me, because I can't believe they could love me in that moment, you know? And so that sense of that you can go to somebody through the thick and the thin, the good and the bad, that they're going to be there for you no matter what, is so critical. And yet we don't put those signals out. We don't have those conditions and conversations for that. And then the one that I also think we struggle with is giving people more opportunities to contribute to us. We're so in the inferiority complex that we don't want to get vulnerable and allow other people to help or do for us, because somehow we feel better when we're in the position of giving than when we're in the position of receiving. And yet we're robbing people of opportunities to give to us.
Wow.
So that's why I invited you today, Lynn. I wanted to let you contribute to me. I also know you have tons to contribute to the people that are listening.
Well, you just are identifying so well what I feel like the shift in my life has been, from being in education and doing so much of this, but now, as I said at the beginning, of how did I ever have time to work? Because we are very involved. And one just example is, you've heard of the movie nights, the potluck movie nights that Joyce and I have been doing, and I'm in awe that it's been 5 years now we've been doing this. And whether it's neighbors or from church groups or people that we meet through the interfaith, the women's group, people that we meet in the grocery store and say, hey, we're doing this, come join us. And finding the variety of people, and people want to be of service. They want to contribute to our neighbors, our neighborhood, and our society. But it is all about connection. And so our topics have always dealt with, as you said earlier, racial justice or social justice issues, empowering others. We had so much fun. The movie we just showed was Harriet, and only one other person there may be 16 people, only one of them had seen the movie already. And to me, this ought to be required in all the schools and churches, to just see what one person really has made a difference in our past and can continue to make.
Well, and having been at your events, I know that you welcome people to have a voice. You welcome everybody to share in the group. You welcome, you make it safe and enjoyable to have that sense of community and that sense of service. And I don't find a whole lot of places where that's happening. And you choose topics that matter, that are about empowerment. Not just, not that some of the fun topics might be fun, but you know, half the time we don't really hear those things that could change hearts and change lives. So great example of that. I want to just talk a little bit more about the responsibility-based model, because when I talked about the control models, one of the things I said was common to those 4 control models is they're all about manipulating people from the outside in. And I'm saying manipulating on purpose because whether we're conscious of it or not, we're using those tactics to get what we want from people. And those things we want from people aren't wrong. It's just the mechanisms for getting them are not helpful to them or to us in actuality. So one of the things that is true about those control models is they are extrinsically motivating, so motivating people from the outside in, which weakens their intrinsic motivation. So I just kind of want to make mention of that, because in future episodes, I'm going to be going over what are those 4 intrinsic motivators. If we're going to dump the extrinsic motivators, what would be the intrinsic motivators? So that will be an upcoming topic. But I kind of want to talk about this in sort of conjunction with the responsibility-based model. When we talk about leadership in our world, empowering people, helping them feel lovable, connected, and contributing means that everybody needs to be developed in their leadership. So I don't care if you're 5 years old or 55 or 95. You know, we all need to be developed in that internal leader. So one of the things we ask people are, what are the top 3 relationships you have to manage in order to be an influence in the world? And it's a really, I'm curious if did I ever go over that with you?
I'm not remembering us discussing that.
Do you mind if I do that? It's kind of putting you on the spot.
Well, you might have to pull some teeth to
and you can answer wrongly, because that I bet a lot of people out there in the listening audience will. So, what do you think the most important relationship is for you to manage in order to be an influential person in anyone's life, even if you're a little kid? What relationship do you need to manage well to be an influencer?
For me, it comes back to self. I need to be able to just manage what I do, and that it is a new day every day.
Yes.
I mean, I will make mistakes, and I have always believed that it's okay to make mistakes. I mean, it's often very embarrassing.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the shameful issues, but also that's also who we are as human beings. So even for my own children and kids, that it is okay to make mistakes, but how do you own up to them? That might have been one of my own personal things.
And what conditions and conversations were there that kept you from slipping out of empowered, lovable, connected, and contributing, right? If you had the conditions that didn't make it so unsafe for you, right? So you're absolutely right. It is that first we have to be aware of, what am I thinking, feeling, and doing, right? So if we don't have that, how could we positively influence another when we're blind to what we're up to? But let's say that's you got that handled pretty well, okay? What's the second most important relationship to manage, and why? To be a good influencer in the world.
I think if I were still teaching, I would be looking at that position. But since I'm not, it's just my day-to-day connections with people.
So kind of your peers?
Okay, that's a good way to identify what
and
I look at.
As a teacher, you would have said your students?
Well, I would have said my students.
Okay,
I mean,
so actually to be a good leader...
But I feel the children were such a critical part of that.
Right. Often people will say it's the person I'm leading. Right?
Oh, okay.
But we would say the most important second relationship is the relationships you have with authority figures. So whether that's your parents, whether that's your deal with your stuff, right? Yes.
8 principals in 12 years. It's like it's hard to create
Sometimes our
bonds.
Authority figures are our bosses. Sometimes our authority figure are the policeman that pulls us over when we get a ticket. Sometimes they're the government, right?
Right.
Like I remember there was a guy in a car with me. And I said, why don't you wear your safety belt? And he said, I'm not letting the government control me. That's a person with authority issues. That's not a free person, right? So authority is really an interesting thing to consider. How am I managing? I remember years ago, I went over to Creve Coeur Lake and I just brought a notebook and I wrote all my free associations with the words boss, authority figure, leader, and they were mostly negative associations.
Oh, wow.
Domineering, bossy, controlling. Like that's what I had experienced.
Sure.
And I had often felt at the victim of, instead of realizing that I abdicated a lot of times, abdicated power. And so learning how to work through authority issues creates in you a strong leader. Because if you can't deal with your authority issues, you will carry those authority behaviors when you're trying to lead other people. So if you don't deal with who you think is over controlling in your life, you're going to be over dominating when you're leading others, right? You won't know how to work through that.
Okay.
It kind of reminds me of what I was telling you when we were driving over here about, I'm not going to say who it is because I don't want to give it up in the family, but there's a relative of mine.
Okay.
And remember I said he was saying no to me?
Yes.
But he was saying no under the table. So this particular relative, I had asked them to do something, they agreed to do it, didn't do it, didn't do it, didn't do it. And I finally said, do you know that you're really saying no with your actions, even though you're saying yes with your words? You know, do you feel that you can say no and yes with your authority figures, meaning this person's parents?
Right.
And he said no.
Yeah.
And I said, well, you want to work on that. Because it was messing with his relationship with me. It was messing with, which was another authority figure. And it was going to continue to mess with him as he became an authority, even with his friends.
Right.
Isn't that a weird?
Oh, that's what I love, that you are so adept at seeing these things inside. It's like, oh, I needed you all along with raising my kids and teaching. But that's okay. I mean, everything in its time
I
and
could have
place.
used your
This
help
is where I am
too,
now. Exactly.
Yeah,
We
I
would
mean,
have been good
I had to
support.
learn this. I had to learn that that's
exactly.
That's and I had to work through it. Like
And
my
you've
article that I
incorporated
wrote from that was called "You're Not the Boss of Me," because
love it.
deep down inside us, if we don't have our authority issues worked out, we're going to go into you're not the boss of me.
Yes.
I'm not letting the government control me, right? I mean, it's just crazy how slave we are to our fears about authority, and it's in our own heads. Even if we're a little kid,
Right.
You can see little kids that don't do that, but you see many others that do.
Well, especially as a female, I think, though, I'm going to go home to my mirror and try saying that a couple times in the mirror just to see what feelings does that evoke, what images do I get.
What will you be saying?
You're not the boss of me.
Oh.
Because I was raised in a military family, and it was always, it's how high do you want me to jump, sir? kind of thing.
Yes.
And then actually, too, as female, even at my retired age. But what's so marvelous is seeing the difference in my children. They don't feel that way, the girls and the boys.
And I don't even know that it's always wrong to say yes sir or yes ma'am
Right.
to someone,
Of course
because
it's not.
but like we were talking about in the car, you can't say a real yes if you don't have the freedom to say no.
Exactly.
And little kids kind of know this, but after a while they even forget that they're rebelling. And that's what I saw in this relative. I saw that he didn't even see he was saying no in his behavior, and so he needs to start working with his authority figures, which in his instance are his teachers and his parents. And for many of us it's our parents or our teachers, even as adults. So Lynn, before we get into the next relationship to manage, I kind of like to keep people sitting on the edge of their seat a little. I want to make sure to remind our listening audience about LifeWorks systems, because we specialize in performance management through healthy culture transformation. And I want to let you guys know that are listening, to learn more about LifeWorks system and how to get involved with us, including access to information related to today's podcast episode, please visit our website at www.lifeworksystems.com. Subscribe to our podcast, where you can find the main points on every podcast, a list of all the podcasts, and additional information on each episode we produce. So we invite you to join our mailing list and to really research some of that data that we're tying together for you in articles, in webinars, in surveys, and things like that, so that you can get as much support around some of these concepts as you want, because we have about 200 articles in there. And then it also gives you a way to contact us by phone or email. So we really invite you to do that. So, are you on the edge of your seat, Lynn, about what's the third relationship?
What is the third relationship? Oh, my goodness.
What do you think it is?
Well, my first reaction is I think of it in terms of God and me. But for what we can talk about easily here, no.
Okay, can you
don't
see how
know.
God could be an authority figure?
Oh, absolutely.
So for many people, it is their relationship with God because
Okay.
they've imposed on God a lot of the controlling or manipulative or harmful or harsh things that their human parents or their human teachers did.
Put on,
So
okay.
sometimes it means I got to get right with my authority figure in God, right?
okay.
And
Yeah, I don't
even
think
being
of it
able to
that way.
shake our fist at God and say, "You're not the boss of me," you know. And
Right.
actually, it's so funny because God is the least likely to be the boss of us, always
is
giving
true.
us free will. You want to
Totally.
murder? I'm not going to
Totally.
stop you, but I sure
That's-
wish you wouldn't, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So if it's not authority now,
Okay.
you're not sure what it is?
No.
It's actually your peers.
Okay.
Because how can you help lead the people that you're trying to guide that maybe are looking up to you if you're not getting along with your neighbors, with your brothers and
Right.
sisters, whoever peers are to you?
Okay.
Peers could be the next door neighbor. It's anybody that doesn't have any perceived power over you.
I thought you said the second one was the peers.
No,
When I
so
had
the
mentioned
first
as a
relationship
teacher
is
thing.
yourself.
Right, right.
The second relationship to manage is with your authority figures, which includes God.
Okay, and you said it. Oh, the second one, and that it could be the peers, but the third.
No,
is
the third
really-
one is your peers.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay,
the third
that's
it was
where
your
I should-
peers.
Thank
You don't even want to try to manage a relationship with your peers if you're not right with your authority figures because it's also going to affect how you act
okay.
with your peers.
Interesting.
You know, you've seen
Okay.
kids where
I
they get
don't
all bossy
distinguish
with
them.
each other. Yeah.
Well, they're
yeah.
learning. They're basically role playing and seeing
Right.
what's in there.
Well, when we think about authority, typically we think about power over. Because many of
Okay.
our authority figures did power over. All we have to do is see a few power over kind of authority figures and we might have issues.
Okay.
Even if the people that we're directly connected with don't always do that. When you run into an authority figure that's kind of a push the thumb down on you,
Right.
isn't it tempting to lose your ability to pause and be who you want to be?
I wonder if I've done enough work then in that area over all these many years that it's like, okay, who do I think of as even the boss of me?
Yeah. Sometimes it's just a
think I have
moment
any.
where somebody's in a bad place and they're kind
Oh,
of
it
being
could be
all
the
controlling.
okay.
But it's pinging on that feeling of you're not the boss of me. Or
Right.
no, I won't, you can't make me.
Right.
You know, so it's something around that sense that they have more power, even if it's an illusion. So with our peers, we don't typically feel like they have more power over us. So we're not as worried about them dominating us, but we
Right,
still might have issues with them.
Okay. That'd be
So,
interesting. I'll have
right.
to think about that.
Yeah, so when we manage our relationships with our peers, what we're really doing is we're making relationships and their management a top priority. So I'm going to say that again, we make relationships and their management a top priority because you're doing all that to be in service to those that you lead.
Right.
Right? It's positioning you, strengthening you, developing you
Right.
into being a naturally helpful leader to other people,
Right.
even if you're the little kid leading the adults.
Sure.
Right? Like that 8th grader, he was pretty able to go back and manage his relationship, right,
And
with
he
his
did,
authority
yes,
figures, and
that is
his
so
peers got involved. And so one of the reasons I wanted to emphasize that is in our new culture model, we have an actual image of a house.
Okay.
And the foundation of the house is trustworthiness. And what that means is that when I'm in relationship with people, whether you're my authority figure, you're my peer, or you're my subordinate in title, I'm going to make having a 10 relationship with you number one. Do you know what I mean by that, having a 10 relationship with you?
Tell me.
So if I'm, like right now, I would say you and I, we have a 10. I don't think I've ever had anything less than a 10 with you,
I
right?
can believe
But let's
that.
say we had a falling out over something.
Okay.
And I knew we weren't at a 10.
Right.
If I make it a priority to make our relationship a 10, I'm going to come to you and I'm going to say, Lynn, I've always felt like we're in such a great place with each other. And right now, I'm not giving us a 10 and I want to talk about it.
Okay.
I may not even know what to do about it.
Sure.
You know my sister Sandy.
Yes.
We're very, very close. And one day we had something that got in the way and I came over and I said, you're like my best friend. And yet I wouldn't be serving us if I didn't tell you right now there's something wrong.
Right.
And we both worked it out really quickly.
That's awesome.
But it was also important that one or more of us want to maintain that 10.
Yes.
Because a lot of times when people are in the workplace and they're struggling, I even had the other day, I was doing a women's presentation at the Professional Women's Association.
Right.
And it was all on mentoring. And a lovely volunteer came up and I said, do you have any relationships that are not a 10? And she said, yeah, I have 2. And I said, what number would you give them? And she goes, I think the first one I would give a 5.
Okay.
And she goes, the second one I'd give a 3. which is really low. Like, that's problematic.
Yeah.
And I said, did you even know you had two and that they were that low? And she goes, I didn't. So even the self-awareness to realize she had two relationships that she was sort of tolerating being in pretty big crisis with those relationships. So being willing to manage all of the relationships in your life is a prerequisite in the in the responsibility-based model.
Okay.
And in the control model, that's not even important at all. It's all about getting what I want.
Right.
I don't care if we're a 10, right?
Yeah, I
just do
remember
what I
those
tell
other
you to
areas.
do.
Yeah, I like this. I like this.
So that's really a hard one for people. They're like, oh, well, you can't be a 10 with everyone. Being a 10 doesn't mean you're best friends with them. It just means that you've resolved anything that's actually causing a blockage or an inability to function well with that person.
Yeah, I like that.
So,
I need to write that one down.
which kind of leads me into another thing that I wanted to talk about. One of the things that we work on with relationships being a 10 are what's called psychological contracts. So psychological contracts are when maybe you have a certain idea of what you're required to give and what you are entitled to get. And maybe I have a different idea of that, right? And so we might not agree on what all that is, which isn't necessarily a problem if we don't talk about it and it's rankling us.
Right, then you would
Then
want
it's a problem.
So what would be a phrase that you would approach someone to say that? Because I feel like you're so adept at, first of all, recognizing when those exist, but even being braver than that and addressing it.
Well, I'll give you an example of one that happened in my family. So one of my kids, when they had their baby, they had made this decision that they weren't going to call anybody when they were having their baby, that they were going to wait till the baby was birthed.
Right.
Well, I lived a couple doors away, and I thought I'd be the first person to get the phone call, right? So I had this expectation that as the mother, I deserved to get a phone call when labor was ensuing, right?
I agree.
That family had decided from reading books and what kind of birth they wanted to have, and that they wanted to keep it more between the husband and wife and all they're entitled. Honest to God, they are entitled to that.
They are.
But my expectations were so different from that when I got the call the next day that the baby had already been born, I was hurt. Now, the way we worked through that is I went to her and I said, I'm hurt. And then she was able to help me understand where she was coming from. So we moved through that and we healed that.
Okay.
But if you have a difference like that and you get irate or you get upset or you get hurt feelings or you feel insulted or something like that happens, then you won't work through that. So now you don't have a 10, but you're not talking about it because you can't even believe it's happened. Like, how could you not see it my way? Right? And yet it isn't wrong or right. It's just very different.
Very different.
So another example would be, because you and I are both baby boomers, so we were raised with a whole set of belief systems like you have to earn respect and you have to respect your elders and things like that, right? Some of those I can see by your face. We don't always agree with all that. But there's some truth to those, right? It's not all wrong or anything like that. But a lot of millennials have been raised in a completely different mind shift. Like, I know in my family there wasn't a two-way street on learning. Like, my parents thought it was their job to teach me. They didn't want to hear what I had to teach them. Millennials, they can go online, and even the Gen Zs, they can go online and become almost a subject matter expert in certain things that they get passionate about. Why shouldn't they teach us?
Right.
Even if they're 10 years old, why shouldn't they teach us?
Yeah,
But
that's the biggest contrast that I just found. I visited, they have a grandparent day at two of my granddaughters' classes at their school, which, whether we mention it or not, but it's new for grandparents to get to be having breakfast with the kids and having a class with them. I went to a freshman English class and the junior English class, and the freshman class, the kids actually sat in the middle of these U-shaped tables so that the grandparents could sit there. So they were on the floor, but still being so interactive with the studying of English and how we use language and using different stories for language. They were actually studying a book out of Iran of current kids raised there, and it was a graphic novel, which how many of us ever grew up with?
Right.
That was so unheard of. But even more striking when I went to my junior, the daughter that's a junior in her class, it literally was entirely run by the students.
Yes.
They studied Edna Vincent Millay and her work, and 2 students presented, and the entire 40 minutes of the class, I don't think the teacher said more than a dozen words. That is such a shift.
Well, and
my upbringing.
it isn't that any one way is all wrong or all right. It's just
Exactly.
like, even when you see the baby boomers and the millennials, where it gets problematic is when the baby boomers say, "Oh, those presumptuous millennials! How dare they think I've worked hard to earn my role of respect and my ability to boss, because I paid my stripes,
Yep.
And then the millennials are like those dinosaur baby boomers that can't get with the fact that we all have stuff, And they're both right and they're both wrong.
Correct. I
And
agree
so
with you.
that's why psychological contracts are so important to understand, because our first assumption is you're wrong, I'm right. Right? And if I don't even think you get me, I'm going to separate myself emotionally from you. And before you know it, we're not even friends, we don't even like each other, or maybe I even quit if I'm in a relationship with you. I quit the relationship or I quit the job, and you may not even know what happened.
We certainly are seeing that in some situations
Yeah.
today.
So psychological contracts are a big deal, but they are more likely and absolutely likely to be resolved if we hold the foundation that relationships are more important than anything else. In the old way, relationships were nice to have but not need to have.
Correct.
Now they're absolutely essential to have.
Thank goodness.
And we're scared. We're scared that we're not going to do that very well, or we're scared that that's going to take too much time.
It's got to be fascinating when you go into different organizations and seeing, is it truly generational shifting, and is it taking place?
Yeah.
Because it is our young people that are going to really have to be impacting the world to such a degree, but there's so much more connection when they work together that way, and seeing how much faster they accomplish things, and some of the ideas that they get like out of nowhere, like where did that come from?
Yes.
But it was because they were basically team working their thoughts.
Yes. So we'll talk about this more as we go forward in the podcast.
Wonderful.
But having a responsibility-based workplace culture, there's some investment that people have to make into one another, into shifts, and it isn't all that long, but it feels long when we're in it, because we're moving out of this, I've got to fix you and convert you and change you, into tell me who you are, let me share who I am, let's find a way to trust each other, let's find a way to be at a 10 with each other, let's find a way to maintain that. Now, speeding forward, but you have to slow down to get there. And a lot of people just think there's no time to slow down, but we can't afford not to slow down. I always say it's like having a check engine light come on and say, well, I can't deal with that. Well, you better, or it's going to be bad for you, right?
What a great goal to look forward to.
Yeah.
Keeps me excited. Thank you.
So Lynn, this has been particularly fun with me because I just feel like we're always kind of gung-ho. We both talked on our way here how we're both so passionate. So I'm really grateful for your heart, for your mind, for your willingness, for what you're doing in the world. I'm really grateful to have you in my life and to be in your life and to share this with you. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. What a blessing. What a gift. Thank you.
And while we are already at almost an hour of whatever this is going to turn out when we've edited it, we want to thank our listening audience. We are going as deep as we can each time, but there's always going to be more. I really appreciate you letting me set such a deep foundation for you, because you are, as an audience, if you're hanging in there with us, you're willing to slow down a little knowing you can speed up later. And I appreciate that very much, because all the tools in the world aren't going to really fix anything for you if you don't kind of get these mindset ideas. So super grateful for you. Hope you'll come and really take an action from this. Maybe it's to look in the mirror in the morning and say, you're awesome, you're a rock star, I'm so proud of you, I can't wait to see what you're going to do in the world today. Like, even if you just take to heart those 4 core needs, and go look on our website and read some of the articles about the 4 core needs and about what it is to have psychological contracts and psychological safety. So I really hope you take a next step and sign up to be part of our community. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to LifeWorks today. This podcast has been brought to you by LifeWorks Systems CEO and host Judy Ryan. The intent of this podcast is to provide you with hope and new ideas for greater joy in your life and work. For more information on our organization and earlier podcast episodes, related articles, videos, and more, please visit our website at lifeworksystems.com. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast and mailing list. We invite you to join us in creating a world in which all people love their lives and where your life works today.